I wanted to really just focus on one thing today, and then we have some happy duties, the presentation of some awards. I was honored to be able to give a presentation about some of our analytics work, and these are all projects that you're familiar with at the National ACE, American Council on Education Conference, which is one of the largest national conferences in higher education. And when I was there and just before I escaped the snowstorm in Washington, D.C. that paralyzed the East Coast for a couple of days, I got to attend a presentation by probably the dean of the federal policy advocates in the higher education community, the vice president for ACE. And without politicizing the situation, I thought it might be useful to share with the board what smart people who have been Washington watchers for decades see facing higher education and more broadly the nation, but really with a focus on higher education. And he chose to frame it, and I will frame it the way he did, in 4 parts. One is a set of issues around immigration, which obviously have touched Hawaii pretty deeply. One is a look at budget and spending. One is a look at tax reform and how that might play out, and then sort of a general tone as to what we can expect to see in Washington, D.C. And I will share that while we often talk about almost a third of our budget, our expenditures being extramural funds, mostly federal, in addition, the impacts, as I outline them, you'll see are actually potentially much more significant. So in the area of immigration, early in the current administration, 4 executive orders were floated in draft form. Only one of those was issued. That is, of course, the travel ban in various formats, Travel Ban 1 and Travel Ban 2. And we see that playing out, obviously, with Hawaii in an extremely prominent role nationally on that. But just to note the other 3, which also have potential significance to higher education, these were drafts that are not yet issued. One is about welfare benefits for aliens. That is the language that was used. A second one is on employment, so that would particularly be impactful in terms of H-1B visas for both our employees, but it also creates the general pathway for immigrant students to gain employment in the U.S. And then the third area is DACA. We are, of course, on record in supporting DACA, and I thank you for your support. They noted that nationally there are about 800,000 DACA participants, of which about 300,000 are enrolled in higher education in this country. So that's a pretty significant area. Secondly, let me comment on budget and spending. The so-called skinny budget was released. That is a draft of the President's budget. There was not good news in there for higher education across any front, and I think that has been covered pretty comprehensively in both the general press, the local press, the higher education press. It is not friendly to the Pell program, which is pretty fundamental. It is generally not friendly to science and research, and particularly science and research, which is not in favor at this time by the administration. That would be everything climate related that would help us monitor what's happening with the planet. There are also other areas that could be challenged around stem cell research, for example, to which some in the administration object. Obviously, locally we looked at things like the East-West Center, which was singled out. So let me put that in a little bit of context. That it is likely that was a proposed FY18 budget. So that is what would apply from October 17 through September 18. It's expected that for the remainder of this year, we'll continue under a continuing resolution. That budget, the so-called skinny budget, was an outline. It was only 50 or 60 pages. The real thing will, of course, be much denser. But at its heart, it showed a $54 billion increase in defense spending, which was going to be made up from a bunch of other places, and in particular those I mentioned. The full budget is expected in May. Typically, that is provided in February, so the schedule will be very challenging to adopt it in time for the FY18 fiscal year. It is not expected that the president's budget will prevail. In fact, the president's budget almost never prevails, even when the president is of the same party as both chambers, that it becomes the president's budget, and Congress has the responsibility to appropriate. Congress comes from all 50 states and has opinions about the funding that is allocated to the states. So I think we can expect a lively give and take. In addition to that, the debt ceiling was quietly reached. While that was front page news in past administrations, right now we're entering the phase in which the administration plays games to manage the debt ceiling. So we can expect some drama around that when it gets hit again this fall. So the short story is that the president's budget, while alarming for higher education, is not the budget of the nation, and we need to respectfully advocate, but we also don't need to panic just yet. I'll point out that the East-West Center, as an example, has not been fully funded by an administration for many, many years, and it has been Congress that has kept it operating at the level we enjoy today. The third area I wanted to mention was tax reform. Reform is really hard. There isn't a lot of optimism that Congress will be aligned enough to really implement substantial reform. More likely, rates will be cut on certain groups. Remains to be seen which groups. But there are some challenges for higher education, and they come in two categories. One is a set of risks to all nonprofit institutions. So that includes whether or not limits will be placed on tax deductions for charitable contributions. We benefit greatly from this through the donations to the UH Foundation. And as you know, we recently hit $1 billion in the history of the foundation raised for the University of Hawaii system. There are risks to executive compensation in nonprofits, probably not a risk for us, and challenges potentially to UBIT that we can also keep an eye on. There are also some risks to higher education. There are some who question large endowments, particularly at private institutions. Again, probably not a high risk for UH given our relatively modest endowment, but there are concerns about how endowments, which are tax exempt, whether they are being adequately deployed to support students. There are questions about taxability of the tuition benefits that we provide for our faculty, staff, and dependents, and potentially even graduate assistants. In fact, we give out several $1 million of tuition benefits to our employees and their spouses and partners. And then there's questions about the tax benefits that are provided to individuals associated with tuition savings programs and educational expenses. It turns out that the current estimate is that those are worth $35 billion. So those tax benefits nationally are higher than the entire Pell Grant program. Lastly, let me just mention the general issues, and again, this is not a political statement, this is an observation from a Washington watcher that this administration is being challenged with the difference between campaigning and governing. And I'll just leave it at that. I think many of you can interpret what that means. They are way behind in getting people into place. There are about 2,000 appointed positions in the federal government, most of which do not require Senate confirmation, and they are nowhere near where they need to be in terms of filling out agencies. One question is whether they will be making appointments to agencies intended for downsizing. In terms of policy, the observation that is being made is that there is a pretty limited role for people who have been considered experts or for policies that are science-based. There is an observation that the various camps that have participated and who advise the president are not in alignment, so that has become challenging for those who are attempting to influence policy. That includes the party, the the people who helped get him elected, the family and friends, and the group considered to be the generals, who are widely respected as established and experienced leaders. And finally, there's a challenge with the shift to our two parties. One is now in the role of governing, and it has been in the role of opposition. And the party, the Democratic Party, is now in the role of opposition, and neither one of them appears to have yet adjusted to how to function in those roles to move our country forward. So I think it's a fair statement to say that we will be challenged, that this will be impactful, that our job is to try and protect our students and our programs as we move forward. Our strategy for doing so is to work through our national associations. No one university can individually impact the overall climate, and I think you can get a sense of what the people who have done this for a living on behalf of higher education are seeing. They do invest in staff who monitor and address the general higher ed challenges. They communicate with us and they let us know when we can be helpful through the participation of our congressional delegation. And that is part two. We need to spend more time with our congressional delegation to make sure they understand our concerns. Unfortunately, I did escape Washington, D.C. and missed a couple of meetings that had been scheduled while their offices were closed and I was getting out of town. But that's something we have to redouble at the staff level and with them directly as well. And just as importantly, we need to maintain our relationships with the agencies. The leadership in agencies changes, but they are largely civil service employees. In many of these agencies, we have had long-standing relationships, and this is the time when we need them most to understand how to maintain positive collaboration on the path forward. Frankly, it is more tumultuous inside those agencies than we even see, and so to the extent we can help, we will do so. So, not great news, but I will also say it is not a time for despondence and desperation. Last night I had the very great pleasure of attending the Dan and Maggie Inoue Distinguished Chair in Democratic Ideals presentation. Ai-jen Poo, who many of you saw, who was the commencement speaker at Mānoa in December, gave a dynamite lecture. She is a professional activist and change agent, and her message, which I think we all need to embrace, is oppose where necessary, but propose on the path forward positively, and as she has now embraced in her time here, positively and with aloha. And that is what I think we need to do as well. So I thank you, and let me move on to something much more positive. And that is the announcement of the UH participants in the Governor's Awards. The Governor's Awards for Distinguished State Service are part of the state's employee recognition program. It's administered by DHERD, and there are 3 categories of awards: Employee of the Year, Manager Year, and Team of the Year. Each is designated to honor employees of the executive branch, including the University of Hawaii, who exemplify the highest caliber of public service. Each department submits 1 nominee in each category, and then they go on to compete for the Governor's Awards, which are recognized at a statewide award assembly in May at the state capitol. So let me announce ours. Not everyone is present with us today, but I wanted you to know before potentially they may win the Employee of the Year award, who knows, in May. Our nominee for Employee of the Year is Luke Flynn, who is not with us today. Many of you may be familiar with Luke. He's at UH Mānoa as director of the Hawaii Space Flight Laboratory. He is also director of the Hawaii Space Grant Consortium, which is statewide. So he's very involved from his Mānoa base in many of the great programs that you see, for example, when our community college students are launching CubeSats. So we will try to get him to a future board meeting to be recognized and receive the prized certificate. The UH nominee for Team of the Year is the UH Hilo Maintenance Crew. This is a team of 8, small but mighty, under the supervision of Neil Nagao, and you may remember he was the winner of the Building and Grounds Award last year. This year we're recognizing the entire team that works hard and serves as an inspiration to the entire Hilo campus. Each individual has skills, but when the project calls for it, they work together as a team. They've switched from paperwork orders to a computerized system so that each crew member can receive and respond to requests directly. They've adjusted their work schedules to be available to the campus for extended hours, which is when our students and faculty are present. Efficiency has enabled them to complete more complex tasks in-house rather than outsourcing, which saves the campus thousands of dollars. And most of all, their positive can-do attitude has inspired others to see how true teamwork really does work in the UH system. So the group of 8 is not here. We will recognize them the next time we're in Hilo. But accepting the award on behalf of the team will be Chancellor Don Straney and Vice Chancellor Marcia Sakai. So it was not planned this way, but we have 2 out of 3 for UH Hilo this year. The Manager of the Year is Matt Platz, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. So congratulations, Matt, who is here today. He provides academic leadership across the campus. He's made successful adjustments to programs and majors with declining enrollment and increased efficiencies in the bottleneck service areas. He plays a critical role in forging partnerships and involvement with various civic and commercial organizations with initiatives that advance economic development for Hawaii Island. He's mentored a number of faculty members in successfully competing for grants and funded research and funded curriculum development. With his support, the STEM Honors Program was created, scholarships established, providing much needed support for economically disadvantaged students. He's an active collaborator on the $20 million EKY EBSCOR project that I think many of you are familiar with. And colleagues have commented, among other positive attributes, he supports professional development well, encourages and enables the people he works with to achieve their full potential, taking advantage of all the opportunities before them. That he's a visionary with the courage to lead institutional change, that he's a leader who inspires, empowers, and brings out the best of those around him, and that he's a dedicated public servant for the university and the state of Hawaii. So Matt, if you could come up.